For today's webinar, we'll be looking at developing leadership thinking for TPM and Lean and CI. Our presenter today is Ross Kennedy. Ross is the President and Founder of CTPM. Ross is recognised as Australasia's leading authority on total productive maintenance and CTPM's operations excellence through the TPM and Lean methodology. Right, so let's get started. We hope you enjoy today's webinar, and I'll now pass you over to Ross.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, and thank you for attending. Today we're talking about developing leadership thinking for your continuous improvement, or whether we call it TPM and Lean or people call it continuous improvement. It's all about helping your site go down the path to operational excellence. And we have identified 5 themes we want to talk about today. One is our challenge for leadership thinking, then a little bit about the importance of time perspective, then the thinking behind TPM and Lean, or CI, as often is called today, and probably the main part of this webinar will be comparing mass production and lean production leadership thinking, because I believe that's probably the thing we really want our leaders to have, this lean thinking type approach. And finally, the key points on leadership thinking. So a bit of a summary of what we have learned over the last 20 years. So to start off with our challenge for leadership thinking. Moving leadership thinking at all levels from traditional short-term cost-driven thinking to long-term total cost thinking has been one of the great challenges faced by many sites trying to implement and sustain their continuous improvement journey. And this is probably what's prompted this webinar, is that we have, or we continue to come across when we go to new clients, this traditional short-term cost-driven thinking in a lot of organisations, and hopefully after this webinar we can contribute to getting that change in thinking to more of a long-term total cost thinking environment. And that leads on to this long-term thinking and the importance of time perspective. Brian Tracy, in his book Psychology of Selling, spoke about the most successful people, companies and countries having the longest time perspective. So what does that mean? Well, probably the easiest example we can give you is a person leaving school and wanting to take a career. And an example might be taking a doctor. I want to be a doctor. All of a sudden someone's put a very long-term perspective on their career. And what we tend to find is doctors are relatively successful people in our society. The alternate part of that is where people have a very, very short-term perspective, and very sadly, the homeless tend to have a very short time perspective. They tend to focus more on when they're going to get the next meal and where are they sleeping tonight. So I guess the point we're just trying to make is people with the longest time perspectives tend to be more successful. If you think about your own workplace, think of your workforce and the time perspective they have in relation to the business, which is often toward the end of the shift, and compare that to, say, the site manager, where the time perspective may be about the annual budget or the 3-year plan or even the 5-year plan for the business. So we see it's very important that leaders do develop the long-term perspective in our leaders. The other point that reinforces this is that in the book The Toyota Way by Jeffrey K. Leica, he talks about the 14 management principles which created the Toyota Way. And those management principles are summarised under 4 headings: long-term philosophy, the right process will produce the right results, add value to the organisation by developing your people and partners, and continuously solving root problems drives organisational learning. Now, these are all key aspects of what we want our leaders to focus on. But again, the first one is long-term perspective. Base your management decisions on long-term philosophy, even at the expense of short-term financial goals. And these are the thinkings that have underpinned Toyota as it's become the greatest manufacturing company in the world. So that's just a little bit on time perspective, and I think that's an important aspect. So we need to really develop the time perspective of our leaders, no matter what level they're at. And the second part is the actual thinking behind TPM and lean, or continuous improvement. And as we probably all fully understand, that Dr. Edward Deming was one of the great influences in Japan after the Second World War, where he was promoting or teaching them about his latest thinkings on quality. And his main focus was on the process, not just the activity. In other words, don't just look at the problem right in front of you, look at the whole process associated with it. In other words, broaden our thinking to looking around and saying, well, what's happening to the process, not just this specific activity. The second one he was very big on was prevention at source for the process. In other words, find your problems at the earliest possible time. And you've probably all seen this slide previously used, which is saying if we find the problem, for example, if it's the raw material, and we reject it because it's not right, the cost is very, very small to the business. Whereas if we use the faulty raw material and make a product and give it to the customer in the worst case, and they reject it, it can be very, very expensive for our business. So again, it's finding those issues at the earliest possible time. The third point he emphasised was the tyranny of time when addressing problems. In other words, the longer the time frame between when something happens and you finding out about it, the harder it is to get to the root cause. So these three thinkings, again, I think underpin what we want in all our leaders, for them to fully understand these ideas. Now, this prevention at source concept was taken by Toyota and applied to equipment. And again, they found that by finding their defects at the earliest possible time, the cost of fixing a bent grease line, for example, was quite cheap compared to having a major bearing failure on equipment and having a major breakdown. So again, this prevention at source is an important thinking we need in all our leaders. And that leads us on to the very simple ask the question, get everyone involved. We have a simple poll. Is the thinking of prevention at source well understood and practiced by all your leaders at your site or in your company? So, or are people more focused on just job at hand and getting tasks done? Interested in seeing what everyone's views on that are. So we'll get our poll going and we'll see what we've got. Currently we're running at about 58% no, that not everyone's got this prevention at source thinking in their organisation. Now up to 57 no, with 82% of the vote counted. So we should be just about ready to close the poll. And right, so but polls come in, as you can see, 40% yes, which is excellent, but 60% are saying no. So there's obviously an opportunity there to start generating some new thinking in the companies. Right, well, let's move on to the main thrust of what this webinar wants to try to address today, and that is these comparing the mass production, which is a traditional thinking that we still see in a lot of organisations, to the new thinking of what some people refer to as lean production or lean. And we've identified 7 areas: the focus. Mass production tends to be output driven, lean tends to be customer driven, technology, there's people aspects, cost control, quality management, and the way we go about improvement. So I'll just go through each one of these and we can see what the change of thinking might be required. Now, output-driven versus customer-driven. The customer can be seen as the external customer. The customer can be seen as the internal customer. So from external customer perspective, we look at what gives value to our customers, and obviously the best quality at the lowest total cost, at the best service and the best delivery is what our customers want. And if we're going to be successful at getting as many customers as we want, we've got to be good at the whole four. We can't just be good at one or the other. So it's getting those whole four right is important. And I think most of us understand that in our businesses today. But if we think about this from an internal perspective, and what happens inside our plants, for example, what we find is we go to some organisations where you'd almost describe them as output-driven, where their focus is obviously on safety, because everyone recognises safety is so important. But then it's about, we've got to get the product out the door for the month. We've got to get our monthly figures up so that our costs look good. If we don't get the output out, our costs are going to look bad and we're going to get bashed up. So we go to some organisations and you can just tell that it's all about, okay, yep, safety is very important, but then make sure we get the figures out by the end of the month and keep our costs down. What do we mean by customer focus driven or customer driven? Internally, ensure what they pass on to the next workstation process is to the required quality standard. In other words, recognise that we're working at our workstation, and whether that be in the factory floor or in the office, and we're doing our work, and we have to pass on to the next part of the process. And what we've got to do is, if we're customer driven, is to ensure what we're passing on to the next process is right. And an interesting way of testing that is to go into your workplace and ask your people, how do you know you've produced quality output? And if they look blankly at you, you've got a problem. If they say, well, I'm producing exactly to the specification and here's the standard that is required and this standard is up to date and this is the way I do it, you've probably got a very good customer-driven process. So that's, again, a thinking. And if you go and study Toyota and the way they train their leaders, the messages they get across to all their leaders at all levels, recognise safety first as a given, and that perfect quality and customer satisfaction are the most important focus of the company after safety. And they also understand and reinforce that quality is never sacrificed for cost or expediency. So if it's not right, we don't move it forward, we get it fixed before we move it forward. So there's some of the learnings from Toyota. Now if we move on to technology aspect, and in our model we talk about interchangeable parts, and that allowed Henry Ford to get his mass production line running, where he could use agricultural workers to assemble parts because he knew that the parts would all fit, and that was quite a breakthrough by getting the tolerancing of parts. Deming brought to the table the use of statistical process control and process control charts, which is another form of technology, to the lean production environment, where we focus on trends rather than focusing on numbers and targets, or even records of beat the record, get the most out, have a great day, you're the top team type thing. It's looking at the trends, because often when you break a record for being, yes, we had the best shift, made the most output, often things go to custard over the next few days, or you drop down. has been the learning. So focusing on trends and ensuring we're always trending is an important part of thinking rather than just looking at absolute performance. So that's the learning from technology. On the people side of things, specialisation of labour versus team flexibility. Henry was very successful with specialisation of labour, giving person a particular task and doing one thing, but you ended up with very much demarcated specialists, no flexibility, and often quite restricted ownership in the workplace. A lot of companies have tried multi-skilling, and that was a great way to break away from the old traditional model. Sadly, we have seen companies in recent times where they have enterprise agreements that encourage or reward their people if they move from the area to area in the factory, so that they get more experience, and therefore they end up with more pay or higher pay scales. That's might be good for the employee, but what we find is you end up with a group of very average people, and you don't address a lot of problems at the source because people are moving around and teams tend to go backwards every time new people come in. What we found the most successful model is having area-specific skills and flexibility within the area and area ownership through production area-based teams of 4 to 8 people. And by having that environment, everyone has that flexibility where they can cover for each other's workstation. That's why you don't have too big a team. You also have a designated frontline leader, and their role is to obviously develop that synergy within the team. So we talk about, from the people perspective, properly established production area-based teams of 4 to 8 with dedicated frontline leader for each team. Create an ownership environment that has flexibility through base skills across the team and allows the development of mastery skills and team skills, so we can develop prevention at source skills, visual workplace skills, problem-solving skills of our frontline to find the problems at the earliest possible time. So again, this is a different way of thinking about how we should lead an organisation. Moving on to the fourth point, cost control. Department budget driven versus total cost driven. Now, the thing we've learned is that businesses are organic, and what we mean by that is they're like a living organism, and there's all different interactions occurring. It isn't a straight linear type process where you do one thing and get a single result. It's more of one activity leads on to many other interactions. For example, when we talk about the TPM part of improvement and getting operators involved in finding defects at the earliest possible time, one, we can train operators to find the defects, but if we don't make it easy for them to do it by reconfiguring the equipment and putting visuals on the equipment, they waste a lot of time. And if we don't get maintenance to respond rapidly when they find problems, they're going to be totally disenchanted. And finally, if we don't have a stable production plans, they can do a little bit each week, they don't learn. So all these things interact. And as a consequence of that, we've identified there's no really one measure that if focused on alone will generate desired results. For example, a lot of people focus on labour efficiency. Now, labour efficiency may drop by, say, 5% if you stop the equipment to do clean for inspection for 2 hours a week, so you can find defects and develop your front line to find problems at the earliest possible time. However, the benefits could generate tenfold the bottom line. So you can generate tenfold the bottom line benefit to the business. And this is this iceberg thing. The labour efficiency is probably the measure on the top of the iceberg, the visual thing, but it's all those gains you get by picking up on your quality problems and your equipment problems, etc., at the earliest possible time will have a big impact on the total cost of the business. And that's why we use this slide quite often in our workshops about using maintenance as an example, where you have a maintenance budget, but it's all the inefficiencies the company's incurs because the equipment's not running perfectly. And they're the things you focus on. And that's, again, this, look at the whole iceberg for your, from a cost control perspective. Okay, point 5, quality. Control by inspection versus control by responsibility. Now, the mass production model was never stop the line. Keep the line running, because the more we make, the lower the cost. And if the line is stopped, the workers will probably slack off. Whereas the control by responsibility is probably articulated the best by this quote from a senior executive of Toyota in America many years ago, when asked what does he expect from his workforce, and his comment was quite simple: I expect my workers to come to work, and if necessary, pull the cord. In other words, stop the line if there is a quality issue that is affecting the next workstation. So it's having that responsibility to, if there's a problem, as a worker, I can actually stop the line. So again, it's a different way of thinking. And on that basis, we see that in a quality-focused organisation, all personnel have 3 key tasks. 1, inspect their inputs to ensure they are to the required standard. If it is not correct, reject them. And this is what we call zero defects accepted, or red bin quality concepts. That could be someone in the sales department taking an order, and if they don't get the right information, hang on, let's go back and get that information, or handing that order or information onto the design department, and if it's not complete, rejecting it rather than trying to work around it and waste time. Or it relates to a person in the factory as they're making at their workstation, as they're processing the product as it goes through. The second point is ensure their process is capable and they follow standard operating procedures and produce quality output. So in other words, what we do is repeatable and is accurate. And thirdly, ensure what they pass on to the next workstation process is to the required quality standard. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 very simple questions a leader should be asking all the time as they review their area of responsibility and talking to their direct reports. How do you know you're using quality input materials or quality input information? How do you know how to produce the output correctly? And how do you know you have produced quality output? Is there the evidence there to confirm that people are doing things correctly? If they're not, the role of the leader is to ensure there is quality standards for inputs. There is up-to-date, accurate and useful standard operating procedures being followed, and that there are quality standards for outputs that people are using. Point 6 was management, autocratic management versus engagement. I think we all understand autocratic management. Tell people what to do, sure correct tasks are focused on. However, people tend not to do anything until told to do so. Now, autocratic management works brilliantly when there's a disaster. You don't want people getting engaged through questioning, etc. When there's a disaster, you want someone to come in and tell you what to do, and everyone gets out there and does it. However, in the workplace, hopefully there isn't a disaster all the time, and we're trying to get people to take responsibility and produce quality output. So what we want to do is, as we transform that, is to use what we call a pull culture change approach by addressing the what's in it for me to engage your workforce. And we do that through emotive questioning. Things like, do you ever get frustrated because you can't find what you need when you go to do a task? Wouldn't it be more helpful if everything you wanted was at your fingertips? So if we give you a bit of time, would it be helpful for you to sort out your work area so everything you need is at your fingertips? Sorts of questionings rather than tell everyone, oh, we're going to tidy up the workplace and we're going to put everything here, there and everywhere. And then often, I don't know how often I've been through factories where you see people have put shadow boards and racking on the wall to hang brooms and cleaning equipment, etc. And half the time it's not put back because people weren't engaged in the decision making and the process of why the workplace had to be sorted out. Last point, 7, specialist versus everyone. Taguchi Ono, the founder of the Toyota production system, realized very early in the piece that he could not replicate the American model of having a great task of industrial engineers and improvement specialists to improve the business. He had to engage everyone. And he was quite smart in realizing this, because if you think about it, who gets to see most of the problems? And it's often the frontline people who see most of the problems, and often they see them when they're quite small problems. Who's expected to fix them? Well, typically that's why you have staff in a traditional organisation, and often by the time the staff hear about them, they're much bigger problems. And we know it's a lot easier to fix the smaller problems. So that's why we want everyone to be involved in addressing problems at the earliest possible time through cross-functional teams, which tend to focus more on the technical issues, and area-based teams, which are more people development and often those little things that can be picked up very quickly and fixed, like defects. So again, it involves a different approach to leadership. So summary, what are the key points on leadership thinking? Safety first is a given, however quality before output and cost. Identify problems at the earliest possible time. Create a structure and rosters that support development of entire workforce. Total cost rather than just a department budget impact. So look at the total cost across the business. Control quality through responsibility rather than just inspection. Engage the workforce by asking questions. And get everyone involved in improvement rather than just a select few. Think long term. And a final word, education alone is not enough. There needs to be a structured development plan to allow leadership at all levels to experience through demonstration, doing and reflection in their workplace the benefits of the new thinking required to achieve operational excellence. So we can send our leaders off to training courses, and that's fine, but the most effective way we've seen is ensure the workplace they are actually involved in improvement activities, and the education, demonstration, doing and reflection is the way adults learn. So we need to be very mindful of that. So this is best done through their ongoing involvement in structured and disciplined, strategically driven, cross-functional and area-based improvement teams as part of their normal weekly work. And that's, we've seen transformations of organisations occur when that approach is taken for developing leadership. Okay, so hopefully it's been of some help. As mentioned by Samantha, we have our CI Community of Australia membership, which we initiated this new membership format this year. We're quite excited about it. We're getting more and more members every week. So I'll just reinforce that with you. And finally, over to question time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ross. So now we have question time. So you can press the raise the hand button now, or type your questions in the control panel box provided. We have one question here, Ross. You mentioned demonstration, doing and reflection in their workplace through involvement in improvement teams. How much time should you devote to this each week?
What we find is best practice companies try to aim to ultimately, not all at once, but ultimately get everyone involved, especially the leaders, spending about 5% of their time or up to 2 hours in properly structured cross-functional team activity, so being a member of a team, cross-functional team, and spending up to 5% of their time in an area-based team. So all up, ultimately 10% of the normal work time. Typically you start off at about 5 and gradually build up to the 10% over a period of maybe 1 or 2 years.
Okay, great. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, so we'll move on. Thank you for attending, and just a reminder that our next CTPM webinar is scheduled for the 20th of October. Now this time we would like to hear your suggestions for the webinar topic, so just type your suggestions in the comment section of the survey after the webinar, or just drop us an email and we will announce the selected topic in our next webinar mail out. And if you think of any questions that you might have, just feel free to contact us at any times, even if you just would like more information or would like to have a chat. We hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.